Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.
Marking the 10th anniversary of the end of combat operations in Afghanistan and 3 years since the evacuation of Kabul. This series brings us personal accounts of those who were there. Just over 150,000 UK Armed Forces personnel served in Afghanistan. These true life experiences have been difficult to talk about. They tackle challenging issues and may be emotionally difficult to hear. If you feel you may be sensitive to this, you may prefer not to listen.
Welcome to Land, Sea and Air. I'm Steve Bomford, co-founder of Company of Makers.
And I'm Tip Cullen, an actor and former Royal Marines Commando.
On this episode, we talk to James Malone, a former Royal Marine, and I think this is going to be one of the more difficult stories to listen to.
Yeah, I've known James for a long time before he became a Royal Marine, and I think it's a very important story, and I'm so glad that he's going to be able to tell it to us.
Yeah, for the first time outside of his family as well.
Yes, I think it's a very important story.
James, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem, Steve. Nice to chat to you, and just pleasure to be invited and get to talk to you.
Thank you for joining us. Now, I was sort of aware of your work, and I hadn't realised I didn't know the man behind the work, to be quite honest. And I was at a meeting with Tip, actually, which involved the Royal Marines Association, showing a video. Turns out that you were the director and producer of this video. So we're going to you're going to tell your story in a slightly different way. We're going to sort of start from the end and then work backwards.
Yeah, okay. I guess the video you would have seen is Finding an Edge, right?
Yeah.
Which is essentially a 5-minute sort of, I made it as like a thank you note to the Royal Marines Association, and it just covers a funded trip that they do alongside a guy called Dan, who owns Dan White, who owns a chalet out in France. And all it is it's exactly that. It's a ski trip for people with different abilities and different accessibility needs, and it gets them on the mountains around people that kind of understand them, like former colleagues, comrades, whatever you want to call them, lads that they work with. Predominantly, it's lads who served in Afghanistan. So, yeah, a lot of the lads are amputees or have TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. But then some of the lads as well, they're just having going through a rough patch. You know, they need a bit of a reset. It's a bit of a, call it like if you're a signaller, you'll know, but a bit of an e-purge. Like, you clear everything, and you get to focus on just that one thing, skiing. And there's no judgment. So I originally, through the guy that organises and runs the trip, Ian Bishop, who was my section commander in Afghan, he's also he's a double amputee, like very accomplished sit skier. He asked me to come on a ski trip, I'd say 3 years ago now, and I was really happy to go. Couldn't believe I'd been asked. But actually, when I went there, I kind of felt quite guilty and a bit ashamed that I wasn't injured, so I had this like weird like non-amputee or survivor's guilt, and then also I hadn't raised any money for the RMA, and Royal Marines Charity Royal Marines Association, so there was guilt there. But what I did have was a camera, and I kind of felt that, okay, I'll get a couple of clips and a couple of photos, and maybe the RMA can use it, and that'll be like my sort of cheers, Passer, thanks very much, thanks for having me. Use these if you want. And to my, I guess, delight, then they did use a couple of those photos and a couple of the clips in their fundraising event at the Guildhall, which happens every year. And that was massive for me. It gave me an opportunity to sit down and talk with a couple of the people on the trip, and the benefit it was to them. I guess speaking to a bootneck, or person in military or uniform, former uniform, I guess, just kind of broke down that barrier, I guess, and made things a little easier. And me myself, I had really struggled in the years after I left the Corps, received therapy with help from the RMA and Royal Marine Association, and that was, that really got me back on my feet. That was, I'm going to say, probably saved my life, to be honest. So to then get to go back with all those guys and it not be like a dip spinning or a story session, it was just skiing, you know what I mean? We got to say whatever you wanted to say and do whatever you want to do, and I just got to cut around with my camera. And it's quite funny because everyone's like, oh, don't point the camera at me, and then you start getting DMs at the end of the trip like, yo, have you got any photos?
Why wasn't I in it?
But, yeah. Why have you made me look so ugly? But then fast forward a year, Bish gave me another call and sort of said, do you want to come again for 2 weeks and, go all in and actually make something? And by this point, I had kind of turned full-time into photography and filmmaking. So, I went out there for 2 weeks, and for 2 weeks, that's all I did. I mean, there was one really good snow day where I kind of ditched all the cameras and just went for it. But other than that, it was pretty much 12, 13 days of sort of 12-hour days, servicing kit and filming, basically. And the approach with it was, filmed a bunch of stuff all week. And then towards the end of the 2 weeks, I had a couple of sit-downs with a few of the boys. And Baz, who's featured in the film Finding an Edge, kind of said a few things that really I found really quite powerful, and he really summed up, I think, broadly the experience of a lot of veterans. And you can go and see that film online. It's just on the YouTube channel. But Baz in it says, his life is in slow motion a lot of the time. It takes time to get out of bed as an amputee, and time to get dressed, get breakfast ready for the kids. But up on that mountain around all his friends, he finally felt the same speed as everyone else again. And that for me was, that was huge to hear that. And it still gives me goosebumps now. And the film was received fairly well, got into Kendal Mountain Festival, and I got to introduce it to 1,000 people in the main kind of snow film showing, which was massive for me. Every other film there was either sponsored or, had like massive brands behind it. And as a solo filmmaker to go and do that, and you could have heard a pin drop in there. It was pretty special. And following on from that, I had people, I say people, like 2 people, stop me in the street and say, were you that director from the show last night? Like, are we going to hear more about Baz? And I guess that kind of leads on to Once We Were Warriors and the development of that, I guess.
Am I right in thinking you're self-taught?
Yes. I self-taught in that, YouTube and trial and error. But no formal education. And initially, I think I thought that was a bit of a handicap. But actually, someone pointed out to me that, 2 things really. When you're a filmmaker, you need something to draw on. And although I didn't get a formal education, I did have all those experiences in the Royal Marines, private security, and then, following life. And that is something that, 99.9% people who don't apply just don't have. And that's something you can really draw on. So it definitely gives you a very unique perspective. And I, since my time in the Marines, have always felt kind of a little outside the kind of box or look at stuff from a particular angle. And also someone else pointed out that if you do get a formal education, brilliant, and you learn a way to do things, but if you just, pardon the French, but fuck around and find out, then you learn your way of doing things. And I'm telling you now, that isn't always the best way. As I'm getting more and more into the industry, people are just like, what the hell are you doing? But it's got me a full-time career, and I think certain people appreciate that kind of taking action attitude to things rather than planning things to death and waiting for perfect conditions. You just get out the front door and turn your camera on and start filming something.
James, I've got to be honest, if the output is how you measure all of that, then you should be very proud of what you achieved there. Because I when I saw it, I mean, everybody was like, there's a lot of people in the meeting saying that's a really powerful piece of filmmaking. I must admit, I'd assumed you had a team of some description, but to hear that it was just yourself, I mean, it's a remarkable piece of filmmaking. And we'll put the link in the description below so listeners can give it a watch. And I would recommend it because there's some quite moving moments in that, to put it mildly.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I had a couple of people doing test runs and stuff, skiing in front of me. Jack English is one of them, so I suppose I got help there. But yeah, I am kind of proud how it turned out, and I'm glad it's as short as it is and as poignant as it is, and I'm still really proud of it, even after a couple of years. And it's certainly having the Royal Marines charity behind me, and to get that feedback is incredibly empowering. You're not getting any, they could have given me, or a client could have given me, I don't know, 20 grand for that or something, and it wouldn't be as useful as the knowledge and skill that I learned, and that empowerment from kind of doing it yourself, and all the challenges you face as well. What we don't realise is, amputees have a smaller kind of surface area by way of losing a limb, so they run hotter as an individual, so they're constantly trying to cool down even in a cold environment, which fatigues them quicker than everyone else. So what you often get is a lot shorter filming window with people, especially with amputees. So it's about kind of, I didn't know that before, and I didn't understand that about my former colleagues, you know what I mean? So it was also like a real good learning piece for me, and definitely kind of rapidly accelerated my already boundless empathy for people with different abilities. So it's been an incredible experience on multiple levels.
The cooling down thing I didn't know either, but I think getting your viewers, your audience, to try and understand just a sort of fraction of what those experiences must be like and the challenges that brings is obviously the purpose of the film.
Yeah, definitely. And I do, it just, I think we're always told we have these incredible skill sets, and when you leave the military and you're a credit to any employer, and that is true, but sometimes it takes a little while to figure it out. And they say in filmmaking you should shoot and film what you know, and I know these people. I'm not an amputee, but I've had my own problems, and I do understand the frustrations of leaving the military, and just kind of, regardless of how big and tough you are, the anxieties around that, and sometimes the difficulties that you don't share. So I think being the other side of the camera and being able to kind of cut right to the core of stuff definitely comes across in the filmmaking, and something I continue to try and leverage.
And being trusted to do so, I think, because that you can see by the responses that there's an honest conversation going on there.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's always, we had it when we were on operations. You get like a combat camera team come out and they're trying to get your opinion on something, like when you're up to your nuts in an irrigation ditch and you can hear the ICOM chat going, and someone's about you don't want to speak to the camera, because often, as with anything, just by the nature of filmmaking, you can't just put down someone's whole conversation onto film and publish it, because a lot of it is niff naff and trivia. But I think I know from a military perspective what is valuable and what will show that person honestly, truthfully, authentically. I think the greatest fear, but second to death, is public humiliation, and that's, people are really worried about that. And it's just having your kind of finger on the pulse when it comes to that, and showing these people not as overly heroic, not as overly victimized, but just how they really are, and just an honest portrayal of what life's like.
So what are you working on now? Because you haven't stopped, have you?
No, well, we've got I work for a company called, well, the biggest client is the Natural Edge, Simon Jeffries. He's a former Special Forces SBS operator, and he's got a coaching company. So I produce all their content, and we've got a YouTube channel for them and everything else that you see that they put out, on various other clients for social media and short films. But our main piece is Once We Are Warriors, which is essentially you look at finding an edge as a proof of concept, and we kind of developed that through Simon at the Natural Edge. I met his old boss from Poole, which is a bloke called Mick, aka Sledge, and I kind of met him in a cafe essentially alongside Simon, and he, we shook hands, and he asked me the same question, what I'm working on, and it was a YouTube, and I sort of said I didn't want to do YouTube forever at the time. So I sent him Finding an Edge, and he just got back to me and said, mate, there's something in this. He'd just come back from a mountain film festival and was kind of underwhelmed. He felt like it was sort of causeless, and a lot of it was needless. It was just filmmaking for filmmaking's sake. So me and him got together, and we kind of came up with our idea, which was to develop the story and see how far we could go with it. And it started off as 6 pieces of paper on his living room floor, and ended up as, well, so far we raised 70,000 from crowdfunding. Wow. And went to France, Colorado, all over the UK filming and speaking to broadcasters at the minute about how to hopefully get it on television, which is something that we that was like a pipe dream. That's something didn't even really enter the conversation. We were like, oh, let's get it to Kendal Mountain Festival, that would be huge. But we already did that with Finding an Edge, and that was a nice bonus. So the Once We Are Warriors is, we wanted to look 10 years on from the end of conflict, at the end of conflict in Afghanistan. We wanted to look at what happens to those incredible individuals that do really outstanding work, and also people that, for want of a better phrase, go to work for their employer, get injured, and then are made redundant. And who looks after them? Who picks up the pieces? A lot of the time it is them, but there are charities that help and support them. And we opened kind of Pandora's box when we started looking into it. And like I said before, we'd never wanted to lionize or victimize veterans. We just wanted to have an honest portrayal and get that 1 yard closer than everyone else could, just because of our kind of background. And it has been a journey. We're still in production. I think we thought we were going to be finished by now, but little did we know kind of the personal sort of effect it would have on me and us as filmmakers, but especially me, I think, kind of ended up getting sucked into the story.
So do you think the distance from, as you said, the end of combat operations, it's 10 years, is that important, do you think, in terms of it's the right time to tell some of these stories?
I think so. I think when you say 10 years or a decade from the end of, deliberate combat ops, you just think, Jesus Christ, where is the time going? It doesn't, if you look back on, if you've ever served anywhere, whether it's, the Falklands, Ireland, or, in the Balkans and Iraq, and then on to Afghanistan, you probably look back and you think, well, seems like a dream. That feels like a second ago. You blink and, life's happened. So, and I think whether we shy away from politicizing anything, but whether you like whether you like it or not, these conflicts happened and these operations happened, and you have to keep that in the public's conscience and keep it at the forefront, because this, the people that went there are people. Yep. And those that survived are still incredible. Some have had difficulties, and some, a lot don't, but some do. And I think it was really important to just go, wow, that time has gone quickly. Just what on earth are those people doing? And ultimately, what was the cost? And what do we need to do to keep to keep looking after, but just keep it. My friend in the film says, keep your finger on the pulse of these people and make sure that they are, they're not forgotten.
Yeah.
Whether the people that sadly never made it back, but more importantly, I think maybe controversially, like the people that did make it back, because they don't all need a hand, but some really, really do.
It's about keeping that conversation alive, isn't it? When you say get it on TV, I reckon that's obviously about the general public as much as anything else. But I think keeping it alive for the veteran community as well, for those people that have served, because I think, we don't necessarily recognise the service of some of these conflicts in the way we do others, do we?
No, we don't. And it's just largely because it was unpopular and how it ended. It's not like the Falklands, where it was very clear kind of like sort of start and finish an act of aggression. It was very convoluted and complicated and back and forth through these more recent conflicts, and people just have a lot more access to information, so get to kind of share their own ideas about what they think about it and what they see and have their own interpretations. But yeah, I think it comes back to just that human cost and that human factor and the benefit of revisiting some of those things. And I say benefit because for 10 years, best part of a decade, I didn't personally. I didn't. I shied away from it. I was bitter about lots of things, and I understand now the value of that community, and telling people who aren't in that community, so they have a better understanding of me.
Yeah.
And my former colleagues and best friends going forward. And I think that is really, really valuable.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So that's what you're doing today. How did you get into the Royal Marines? What prompted that?
Well, it was a bit of a knee jerk, I think. I mean, my old man was once a Marine, always a Marine, but did 22 years, but I think maybe 24 years in the Royal Marines. A bloke called Scouse Malone, if anyone knows him. He was on strike at Rich in the 90s. won 10 grand. And he was actually in K Company with Tip back in the day. So I kind of know Tip and went to school with his, some of his kids. And I know Tip from just barbecues and stuff back in the day, which is awesome. And we've always kind of been in each other's orbit, I suppose. But originally I wanted to go to and got accepted for a foundation degree at Plymouth College of Art and Design. And I don't know, it was just like a foundation degree in fine art. So that's basically gives you a basis to go on to whatever else you want to do. And I knew that I wanted to do something with images. I couldn't tell you what it was, but I would imagine had I gone, I would have, veered towards photography and filmmaking. Just because I found that side of things incredibly powerful. Like I studied art at school and had a project where we had to do portraits, and first book I pulled off the shelf in the library was Don McCullen's kind of life's work, I guess, and it's got a picture on the front of it of the shell-shocked US Marine in Vietnam. And I didn't move from that spot for the whole lunchtime. I was just flicking through images of that book, and I understood the power of storytelling pretty much from that point. Or maybe not understood it, but I got the sense of it, and it's always stuck with me. I've got that book at home now. Another one to check out would be Larry Burroughs' work from Vietnam as well. That's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, but on kind of reporting back to my family about this, they kind of, I won't tell you exactly what they said, but they dissuaded me from going and doing something creative. And I think potentially there's doing something that isn't giving you immediate feedback in terms of cash, money on the table and paying your way, to go and risk a creative endeavor can be seen as fairly selfish, I think, especially if, I don't know, money might be hard to come by. We had to, I'm not bringing my spine, but it can definitely be seen as a really big risk. So I was kind of dissuaded away from that.
Isn't the sort of standard advice to any young aspiring artist, get a proper job?
Yeah, that was essentially it. That was kind of the end of that conversation. It was like, if you go and do that, I think you'll probably come back a dickhead. That was pretty much what was said. But I mean, now looking back, I understand why. I look at what I was doing. I was just like taking photos on a borrowed digital camera, drawing and surfing and riding a BMX around. Do you know what I mean? There was no sort of real, besides those passions, there was no like real endeavor, I think. I was still a kid. So I sort of said in my own head, well, fine, fuck you. I'm gonna join the Royal Marines, and I got some kind of truths back from my family then, like, I don't think you'll be successful. And that was based on, I guess, my attitude before that, which is, surfing and BMXing and going on the piss. And that was probably the best thing that I probably could have heard, because it just kind of made me a little bit more stubborn and, joined the Corps in 2006, late 2006. And that was, it was, everyone knows it's difficult. It was really, really difficult. I do remember a certain period of time thinking, like, what the hell am I doing here? But I just kind of realised, like, what am I going to do? Like, go back and knock on the old man's door and tell him I quit.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Like, it's not going to happen. Wrong answer, Centurion. Yeah. So essentially, I stuck with it. I had a bit of some complications of injury, and finally got my green lid. Sort of, I think it was like 12 months later, or maybe even a bit longer, maybe 14 months. Passed out with 947 troop, and I do remember leaving Lympstone, and just, to my core and in my marrow and my bones and every fibre of being, I felt like I could do anything. I was 19 or 18, going on 19, and I just felt I was so capable and really could just do anything I wanted. And you do need that level of arrogance, I think. And once I finished King Squad, went to a 4-5 commando and joined Zulu Company. And I just want to say, actually, it was a guy called Brian Smith, Brian the Lion, who was our section commander in training, who kind of really inspired our group to kind of get out of your hometown. I could have gone to 4-2, stayed in Plymouth where I was from, but just his stories of Okjikana and, Herrick and Iraq or whatever up at 4-5 in Norway and mountain training, was just found that quite inspiring. So it was awesome to go up there and sort of walk into, I've got to say this as well, walking down to company lines the first time, it is not only is intimidating, but it's, although they're only small buildings, it's like walking into St Paul's Cathedral. It's like, it's incredible. You know what I mean? You just get a sense of, there is a sense of history there. And I was really proud to join Zulu Company.
I could sense that you were getting taller as you were walking in.
It was fantastic. I mean, you swiftly get checked, and you kind of realise the pecking order, but it's necessary. But I will never forget that, and it's something I'm still proud of to this day.
I can understand that. Obviously, you were eventually deployed to Afghanistan, and what was that like? I mean, I guess you were probably quite excited about it initially.
I do remember getting asked that question. How are you feeling before I went? And dumb, I guess. But I was just like, I wasn't anxious, so it was just like you want to get stuck in. By this point, you've done a year's worth of training. You've done pre-deployment training. You kind of got to know your section. Everyone's been on the beers or whatever for God knows how long, getting to know each other, and you train really, really hard, and then you do just want to get stuck in. And I can remember, flying in on a C-17 and getting to Kandahar and then Bastion. That's all very well and good. There's a bit more training, but flying into the FOB and just kind of getting an understanding from the paras that were there before us, what that place was like at FOB Gibraltar was, I guess I was scared, but I just didn't know it at the time. I just thought it was kind of nervous excitement, but it's fear with a healthy kind of dose of arrogance as well, because that's the only way you're going to get out the door and do anything there. And we now know, like, through kind of books and stuff, but even the Taliban hated that place. They called it the mouth of hell, or like the devil's place. It was just like a really busy, I say busy, it was very kinetic. There was lots of contacts and IEDs and stuff. And the paras had, been through some really hard fighting down there, and we were to experience something fairly similar over the winter.
So do you want to describe what that deployment was like?
I think it's something that definitely changed the course of my life. War does that, I suppose, to everyone. Experiences, especially like combat in a two-way range. But I think we were kind of arrogant initially, I think. And then I do remember kind of the first kind of major casualty. There was a couple of gunshot wounds and stuff, but like the kind of first major casualty was about 6 or 8 weeks in, and someone had lost a leg in an IED strike during a night patrol. And that's something that kind of makes its way to our documentary through a character called Nick. But that experience was, for me, the realization that this was not. I mean, it shouldn't take someone losing a leg to realize it's, not an exercise, and people can die, and they did die. So it was, as a then, I guess, 19-year-old or 20-year-old, however it was, it was sobering, I think, and it continued to be quite challenging. And we had fairly regular contacts and gunfights and rocket attacks and IED strikes, and unfortunately there was a friendly fire incident as well. So we lost 3 people: Liam Elms, Danny Winter, and a bloke from 2-9 Commando, Captain Tom Sawyer. Liam and Danny were corporals, and then there was casualties associated to those as well. And it was those experiences that, along with Nick losing his leg, I guess really started to have an effect on me. And it's not to say that I felt like weak at the time. It's just the job I was doing was, I was a point man, so I was barma-ing, trying to stop people standing on IED. So there's an anxiety there, but also you realise that you're the first into most situations, whether that's clearing a compound to set up for overwatch or a firefight, or if someone wants to sit down, you've got to go and clear it. You go into a meeting or a Shura with elders, you're first in there. You're the first person for any doorway. You don't know what's on the other side of it, and also you're first into any scenario where there's casualties. So that can be, that can really, begin to play on your mind. And unfortunately, when we had the friendly fire incident, it was probably the most. It went on to be the most difficult in my life, I think, and even on the ground. And the way that happened was, it was I won't go into specifics because there's all kinds of reports, and not court cases, but all kinds of meetings and stuff that went on trying to figure out how it happened. But essentially, there was a friendly fire, although I don't like that term because there's nothing friendly about it. But there was a patrol on the ground at night. There was a friendly fire incident, and I remember me and another guy back at the fob, sort of being told by one of the senior guys in the troop, who was not a person to, it wasn't soft touch. There was no soft approach. That was kind of like his way or the highway. It's firm and fair, I think. But I do remember the change in that person coming to say to us in the little TV room, "Right, lads, what you're going to do now is probably the worst thing you'll ever do in your career, and I just need you to just do it and do your best." Yeah. And I just remember looking at my mate who I was going down there with and thinking, fucking hell, like what is it? We got down there at night, and the whole time you're under pressure because there's other casualties. People are essentially dying on your way down there, waiting for medical treatment. So either like stop them, or you're just trying to give it your all. You're trying to give 110%. You don't know if that's enough. So there's a lot of pressure there, and had to take a few risks on the way down there, kind of jumping over like possible kind of ground sign and not knowing what you were standing on really. And then I remember walking into that compound, and it wasn't pandemonium, but there was a lot going on. There was clearly a lot of casualties, and the first thing I did was trip over a bare foot, and I picked it up and said to my senior, "What do you want me to do with this?" He just said, "Put it with the other stuff." And there was just a pile of kind of other parts of casualties and stuff, it is hard to talk about because you want to have respect for people and in death. But I think I've never been this frank about something in public ever, only with my wife and some 1 or 2 close friends. But I think it's important to try and, there's going to be someone else out there who went through the same experience or had a very similar experience, and I need them to know that there's other people out there too, and they understand. But as I went into kind of, try and be dignified and put those remains with the other casualties, you could see a casualty getting lowered off the roof who was no longer with us. They passed away, and having to kind of lower them down and do it with, like, again, dignity and grace. And they're no longer with you, but they're still a friend of yours. They're still a person in your mind. And even looking back now, you think, did any of this happen? Is this a dream? Like, it's pretty peculiar. And on from that, as soon as we dealt with that, we then kind of had to go into open ground. Bear in mind, it's at night in kind of a Taliban area where there'd already been a friendly fire incident, a number of them over the evening, and me and a colleague crawling around a field at night, looking with thermal imaging for hotspots, which were remains essentially of the men that had been killed, and having to put them in my backpack. Then going back into the compound, taking more casualties onto the helicopter when it arrived, and dealing with that, and just speaking to the flight crew, and them asking what's wrong with the people that you have in a poncho, and they're all dead. And kind of having to deliver that news at every step of the way as well. So that was really difficult. And I still had those remains in my day sack when we were patrolling back to the fob, and having to stop by someone who's a friend of someone that had been killed, and they're asking you directly, like, how are they? How is that person? And they don't know what you've had to do or what you've got in your backpack, and you keep it together. I'll always remember, for better or worse, initially when I walked in and stood on or tripped over some remains or pieces of casualties, was that visual moment in my mind of deciding, okay, you are going to have to put this in a box in your head now, because you just got it. There's a job to do, and I suppose I did that for the best part of a decade. So yeah, I think that's certainly, those kind of experiences definitely take a toll on you, and all was well until I think people have an idea of what you were doing within your initial community out on the ground, your troop, and they start asking you if you were okay. Whereas I know we'd been in scenarios prior to that, where they'd been in contacts and ambushes and all that kind of door kicking stuff, where it's probably as intense, but no one's asking you if you're okay. So it kind of gives you a little earworm, and you start thinking, yeah, I'm all right. Like, why are they thinking that? And I felt like people had figured me out, and I felt different. And what was difficult to deal with was I no longer had control. Whereas before I could say, put this in a box and deal with it later. Now I couldn't do that. What was happening was really invasive, and it was changing my perception of things, changing the way I acted with people, changing the way, you can't sleep, or you're on the ground trying to do a job like confirm an IED. You're on your belt buckle with a pressure plate, a yard from your face, and you're thinking about something else, something you've done, and that isn't a good place to be. And I do remember my team commander, Bish, who come back from R&R. He'd been away for that period of time, but he came back from R&R, and he just sort of came to the Sanger or sentry position I was on and asked him to tell him what had been going on. And he just said to me, which I will never forget, because he'd never said this word before, and I wouldn't say it was a different Bish, but I think he could just see what was going on. He said, I think you've lost your mojo, which is just a weird turn of phrase, I think, for anyone out there. And I think I kind of knew the game was up. Do you know what I mean? I was like, oh, fuck's sake. Like, that's really debilitating, I think. You just think you've got a broken leg. Obviously, it's the cliche. If you've got a broken leg, everyone can see what's wrong with you. They understand your limitations. Yeah. Like if you've got a broken wrist, someone holds the door open for you. But like when you've got something going on in your head, all you've got is yourself for company. And it's like being in solitary confinement and the only thing you have for company is those experiences. And they're all horrific because you're 19. Do you know what I mean? Your brain hasn't fully developed. So yeah, I got sent to Bastion for they call it well, I used to call it basket weaving, but for a few kind of conversations with a mental health nurse, and he'd actually in a previous life been on board the Campbelltown with my either the Campbelltown or the Gloucester with my old man who was on a boarding team in the first Gulf. So had a bit of rapport there with him, and he helped me see that he drew a timeline of my life and said all of those things all of the bad things that happened to you from earliest memory to now, write them on a timeline, and by the time you get to you've got like grandparents passing away or maybe your parents splitting up, and that kind of happens over sort of 17 years, 18 years, and then you get to those 6 months of deployment, and it's like becomes like a tapestry. You know what I mean? It's like you're sellotaping on bits of paper and writing down, and that really visually helps you understand why you might be struggling to kind of. It's like getting all your childhood photo albums and throwing them on the floor, kind of thing. It's like nothing is in order, and it's hard to piece back together. And while I was at Bastion, a friend of mine at home had passed away, committed suicide. So I went back home and kind of saw that being there was no one understood me, and being there was doing me no better than actually being on operation. So I kind of turned. I didn't know this, but I was supposed to be going home for good. I didn't know that, right? So I just turned up to Bryce Norton in Desert Rig and said, one-way ticket to Hellman, please. And they kind of like laughed at me. I just, I stayed there, and they managed to get through, and I got a flight back to Bastion and just sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, said I was all good, and got back out into the ground. I think that was really important to finish the tour. And it was as busy as it was. Things had, the kind of fighting season was coming again, and things were a bit more kinetic. There was less kind of IEDs, or we were, doing better at avoiding them. But yeah, ultimately I finished that tour, and I think that was probably a good thing, but continued to struggle, and I just kind of dealt with it by, I guess pulling the pin, I guess, and just being a bit of a social hand grenade maybe, and drinking quite a bit, and that kind of lasted for till I was 30.
So, reading between the lines about what you said there, obviously that's a very difficult story to tell, and thank you for sharing that. But you sort of say pulling the pin as a social hand grenade, and was drinking part of this in terms of how you coped?
Yeah, 100%. It was. There was already I'm going to say a healthy drinking culture within the Royal Marines. Like everyone liked a beer. I think it gets slagged off now, and like people say you overdo it, but like it's a really powerful piece of that way to bond, I think. And it really breaks down barriers, and you see people at their best and their worst, and you get the measure of people for better or worse. And I just kind of took it to the next level, and I was kind of acting out of sorts, and I'd gone and done I'd gone to Faslane. I was drinking a lot there. I then got on a course. I got promoted. How? I don't know, but I got promoted and went on a course to do anti-tanks, and I really wanted to draft back to 40 Commando, but Brigade was going back to Herrick again, so I got drafted to 42 Commando, and I think that really kind of, I don't want to say sent me over the edge, but yeah, I was really using drink to cope quite a bit, and I think the writing was on the wall, and I put my notice in to leave. I lost the passion for that job, and you've got to have it. You've got to be. There's no shortcuts. There's no like bad day at the office. There's no 80%. I'll just go out on the patrol and hopefully things will be all right. You've got to be with it. So I think I'd had a gutful of my experiences of contacts and being on the ground. And you've got to remember, when I joined, I thought I was going to do 20 years. You know what I mean? Like I just seen my old man have a great career, a long career, and loads of cool experiences and loads of really great friends. And all of a sudden, I was just like, could not think of anything worse. I just felt like, I was going down in flames. So I put my notice in to leave, but the tour still fell within that 12 months notice period. But credit to Steve McCulley, Harry Childers it was, and Andy Place at the time, who were in command of J Company. They sort of said, you don't need to do this. You've done what you've done. There's plenty of young lads who are really keen to get out on the ground and have their kind of first tour, which is what you join for, which is what we all volunteer for. And they just sort of said, you don't need to do this. Like, take this, remaining 9 months or whatever it was, and get yourself sorted for going outside. And which is what I did. And I did, a bit of maritime security and was drinking even more. You're just getting like days at sea and then days on land with a bit of cash in your back pocket. And even my next career, I did rope access and worked out in Australia and New Zealand, and I was making even more money. But it got to a point where essentially I was contemplating, filling my pockets up with stones and walking into the sea. That's like as bad as it got. And I never, got my feet wet, so to speak. But the fact that I was able to think or feel so bad that, I felt like my only option, and it felt like more for everyone else's benefit than my own. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't need this baggage. I think that was I kind of scared myself then, I think, and I just thought, I know what the answer is to drinking. I know what that is now, and it's you probably have 6 or 7 fantastic nights out in your life, and you're chasing them for the rest of your life if you're not careful. I just thought, well, there's got to be another way. There's got to be, and just gave sobriety a crack. And I'd listened to a podcast called Recovery Elevator, and in that was an episode called Burn the Ships, and it's essentially about a Spanish conqueror. Forgive my turn of phrase here, but he goes to South America after the Spaniards had failed for 400 years to conquer, South America and get all the riches, essentially. So he goes over there with the most modern fleet that known to man. And when they get there and they're at Anchorage, he gets the whole entire fleet ashore, including all the soldiers, all the matlows, and they're awaiting orders. To which his response is, burn the ships, sink everything, sink the fleet, which is a pretty bold move. But within that is a message, and that's, sometimes it is good to burn bridges. And for them, it was, we're not going back until we've seen the job through, and we're going to sail back to Spain in their fucking ships, and that's kind of the attitude that was something I really grabbed hold of, and I take it now forward into kind of filmmaking. There's so many days where I don't even want to get my shoes on, and I have that kind of lingering presence of my history and that experiences in Afghan. But I do know taking action, getting out the door, just turning that camera on, one bad photo, one shitty piece of film can turn into a finding an edge, which is hardly Oscar winning, but it has started me on a really, really positive journey, and that is more inspiration than I could ever need, to be honest, to keep going. And I'll touch wood, never drink again, because I know on the other side of drinking is all these experiences I have now. And I think what I have learned through filmmaking is, to add as well, like Nick, who loses his leg early in Afghan, is one of the guys in the film Once We're Warriors. I never knew he was going to end up in the film, and I were good friends with Nick, and we lost touch in the intervening years. And I found out he'd got in trouble and ended up going to prison, which I couldn't get my head around. And through filmmaking and developing this documentary, I had an opportunity to share time with Nick skiing and see him overcome things. And also it was actually really revealing for me. And we're learning that in the filmmaking process, and just how initially it was going to be an arm's length process, and I would direct this film and it'd be a look at life, essentially, and 10 years on we'll look at how things have developed. But really there's an element of kind of catharsis there. I kind of hate that word, but it's actually been really healing, I suppose, and raked up a few graves, and that's been tough. I definitely shied away from the project for a bit and had to come to terms with a few things, but it's given me the opportunity to not look at Nick as, I used to think of Nick, whenever someone said his name, I had this kind of flashback of pulling down my NVG, my night vision, picking up the stretcher, looking down to the right, to my bottom right, and seeing Nick, with one leg with a stump in the air, and he was, essentially fading and, having a tough time. Whereas now, when I think of him, I imagine, I can see the image of him, looking up for the first time, knowing he's skiing, and the smile on his face. It sounds corny or chad or cliche or whatever, but that is something that's really positive. And because of those experiences now and that community that I have now, I probably wouldn't pay for it, but I definitely would go through all of those things that I've had to get where I am now. And that is priceless. That is, that's been so beneficial to me not as a filmmaker, just as a person, really. It's kind of, shone light in kind of dark corners that I was probably kind of covering up. And it's been huge.
It's the way the two coexist, isn't it? It's the experience that you had in Afghan, the journey you've been on has fed the filmmaking. But without the filmmaking, I guess what you're saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, you wouldn't have been able to process in the same way, or you may not have, as you say, you didn't get your feet wet, but, there's nothing to say that could have been a very different outcome, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. And you are right. They are kind of, they do go hand in hand. And it's given me, I'm learning to use that experience I had and use how negative it was and has been, and like it got me in touch with that community again. Because going back to the very first ski trip, I remember turning up to the airport and kind of, you can ping a Royal Marine a mile off. Like, my wife laughs now, like people shout across the street, we're on holiday, like, all right, Royal. But like, it took me 3 attempts to walk up to the table. I was anxious about it. I was like, I had really good friends that were Royal Marines, but they kind of weren't, if you know what I mean. Like, we just didn't go on the reunions and stuff. But it took me 3 attempts to reconnect with that community just in the airport. Do you know what I mean? So, fast forward now, it's been absolutely huge, and I can I feel a little bit lighter and kind of walk a little bit taller, I think. And those experiences in Afghan definitely kind of corroded that feeling I had of being able to do anything and being able to conquer all. That become corroded over a bit of time, and I've now been able to rediscover a little bit of that again. And it's been huge. And like you say, they go hand in hand, and I'm happy about it. It's been helpful.
Yeah, and not just to yourself, of course. You've got the people that are in the films that you're working with, and the wider audience. Coming back to where we kind of started this conversation about getting these stories out there, so that people who have probably no experience of things like that, like myself, can start to get an understanding. Not, it's not an experience, but it's it's just a sort of crack into that world to understand. And I think, as we've agreed earlier, it's important that we tell these stories, because otherwise they will be forgotten. And we're not great at talking about this, generally speaking.
No, we're not. And, that's exactly why when I realised that film was going to be a little bit about me as well, that's why I stopped talking, because it was terrifying. But being able to understand people's way of dealing with things and how life can take a unique turn for them, but it's like, it's not the end just because someone's got in trouble, or they've got, injured at work and they can no longer work, or they're suffering from PTSD, or they've got kind of a dependency on, a behavior or a substance. That isn't the end. It's just potentially a bad 5 minutes in your life, and there is another way. And we want to kind of show the general public, and not just military, but all uniformed services, that if you've gone and had this kind of this experience or injury, you're not mad, bad, and sad.
No,
that's like the really awful warning trope of the media that doesn't understand. It's always at arm's length. It's always like a perception. And the trouble is with filmmaking is you have a really short time to get a message across, and people just often don't give the audience any credit. The audiences are smart. They can read between the lines. You don't need to say, you don't need to show, me as someone with a drinking problem. You don't need to show me like bloody E and B and EastEnders. I've got nothing left. Like, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's in plain sight sometimes, and I think people just need to be. It's like you need the lanes, you need the barriers up in bowling. You need a bit of a safety rail, and steered in the right direction sometimes. And having that understanding and creating, being able to develop empathy with an audience outside of the original uniformed services and the general public. Like, we've got a researcher on Lucy, and once I got her researching kind of documentaries about in this space, and she said, well, they say this and they do it this way, but I know you and I know your colleagues, and you're not like that. You're not like the way that it's been produced. So, and she was like, that's kind of a good dawning realization for her. So I think if she's feeling like that, then there's literally millions of people out there who might feel the same way after watching something that we've produced, and that's because we are veterans and we can't change that. And I'm not going to be ashamed of it anymore. I want to use it for good.
Well, I wish you every luck in achieving that. Once We Were Warriors, where are you at with this in terms of, you said it's still in production, it's taking much longer than you expected. So can people still get involved? Can people still contribute, or what's the plan?
Yeah, okay. So we, I tell you this, filmmaking is expensive. If my hourly rate would be like worse than a sweatshop somewhere, do you know what I mean? But we did an original round of crowdfunding, and we got support from loads of different sources, and the Royal Marines charity have supported us in more ways than one, and they've been absolutely fantastic. We are debating doing another round of crowdfunding, because I'm getting mentorship from a BAFTA nominated director at BBC, and he just sort of said, you're not going to get much change out of £200,000 for the edit. So, to get it to a level to get on television, do you know what I mean? So we're waiting to see if a commissioner will come on board and help us out with that, and it'll be a co-production with a broadcaster. But you can we had an angel investment of £5,000 from Hackstead Associates a few months ago. That was absolutely phenomenal. And that was just private. They just reached out to us and said, hey, love what you're doing. Where can we help? And yeah, we've had a few of those. But at the minute, we're just doing quite small time. You can buy T-shirts on the website. So oncewewerewarriorsfilm.com. You can check out Once We Were Warriors Film on Instagram. The same on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. And also just reaching out to me, James Malone, on LinkedIn. All you've got to do is type in Once We Were Warriors on LinkedIn, and that'll come up, because I don't shut up about it. And we can do, we've had angel checks from a number of people. I want to take this opportunity to thank publicly Marine Team Limited, who were really early investors, Nick, Claire, HS Infra, Service AI, the AD Group, Construction Group, Nick, did I say Nick, Claire? And Royal Marines Charity. There's a couple of other private benefactors as well. You know who you are, and all those individuals that gave us their wages, to make this film. Largely the veteran community. It's been absolutely, phenomenal.
Well done and well deserved, I would say, James. That just leaves me to say thank you so much for doing that. Appreciate the fact that this is the first time you've told this story to a wider public audience outside your former comrades and family. And I think it's a really important story to tell. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on, mate. I've enjoyed it.
Tip, that was a very difficult story and a very inspiring story in equal measures, I think.
Yeah, I'm so proud of James coming forward and telling this story. It's quite spooky, really. The position we are in our lives. When the first time I met young James Malone, he was probably a little 11, 12-year-old running around my back garden at a barbecue. His father is a good friend of mine in the Royal Marines, and he grew up, and deciding he wanted to become a Royal Marine. And that was, incredible. Like say, I think you mentioned knowing me, in that sort of sense. But he got through Royal Marines training, passionately went to 4-5, knew they were deploying in operations, and then he went on Herrick 9, and he then was confronted with an extremely arduous, hard tour in Afghanistan, his first tour. And, what happened there and what he spoke about, I think it's very hard for me personally to comprehend, because I've never been in that position. But what he went through as a young Royal Marine is, hard going.
But he's also, as you said, you knew him from, being a young boy. And I think that's a different relationship, isn't it? When you've seen someone grow up, join the Corps, so on and so forth, it must be almost like another family member.
It is. It is. And I think the journey or the challenges he's had since the deployment, gone through his medical discharge and all the adventures. But I think, the struggle to maintain his well-being, his fight, to his escapism through alcohol, which he overcame. It is so admirable, and like to say, like a young son. But it's a really, him and his family are very, very close friends of mine, and I respect them all, wholeheartedly, and they're incredible. And to see the incredibly talented filmmaker, but strong overcomer. Again, like we said with Liz, he's an overcomer, and he's been at the lowest point, the lowest ebb in life, and he's got himself back. And he owns it now. He owns it with his new, he's got a new family. He's blossoming. His talent is really shining through in the filmmaking world. And anyway, as he moves forward and gets better, I just hope I get a job as an actor as well someday, because he has got that eye and that talent. But after what he's been through, it's still. It's even listening to him tell the story. My heart goes out to him so much that he's able to do that, and that's not only for himself, but for all of us, for all the people that have deployed, all the fellow Royal Marines, all the other veterans everywhere, to listen to a first-hand story that James has told us there. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and the fact this is the first time he's shared it outside of his family, I think that's a really positive step. And also, we talked about this in terms of his filmmaking career, which he sort of put on hold, didn't he, to join the Corps, as he talks about when he went to college or was about to go to college to study filmmaking or photography. But he's rekindled that interest. It's something we've talked about in other episodes, isn't it, about people's interest perhaps before they join the service. And he's doing very, very well. I remember actually you and I were on a meeting when we first saw that film, and it was shared by the Royal Marines Association. And it's an amazing piece of cinematography, and it really gets the message across. But you also know some of the people in the film.
Yeah, it's a small world of the Royal Marines, but again, through the characters that James mentioned there, like Ian Bishop, I had the honour of being his troop sergeant when he was a young Marine, and he went onwards. We still are friends. Baz Barrett as well, another fellow mountain leader he was, and a great friend. And what they've been through, and for them to volunteer, but both of them are strong. They're the icons, I'd say, or some of the icons, because there's so many icons out there for resilience and overcoming the physical, disability or physical issues or challenges, and just excelling at whatever they do. But trying to, they do maintain it. I'm sure they struggle with it, but they maintain their positivity. They're always can-do people, and they're making things happen. And along with that is they've pulled in James, who they know has got the talent to be a filmmaker, and they bring him in. And that small team of, fortunate people that I know, but they've created a nice bit of magic. And that is going onwards and upwards, because obviously they're looking now to make Once We Were Warriors, and seeing a few of the outtakes, a few of the cuts, a few of the behind-the-scenes shots, that is looking, incredibly strong.
It's care and compassion, isn't it? That's what I take away from it in terms of the way it's put together. That it really is about the people, not so much as the service, if you know what I mean. It's the people behind or who make up the service, as it were.
No, I mean, I think we've spoke about it before in all the other talks, that is the important thing. It's always about the people, the human beings. And all of the, the film work that James is doing with these people, it highlights him. It highlights I think it's the strength of the human being, you know what I mean, and how they can get through all this trauma and keep moving upwards and onwards. You know what I mean? But also caring for their colleagues, their peers, for and their families. They're looking for that in the wider society. They have got great compassion, and I think that's important considering that really they're commando soldiers. So at the end of the day, they had to deliver lethality, but you come back and bring them back into society, and they've got this compassionate beast which has got that physicality, whether they're injured or not, physicality and mental resilience to move forward and achieve things. And I love seeing what James is, and I'm quite excited about what he's going to make in the future as well. Is those things. But the thing I feel most about at the minute is just as a young Marine, and he's not that obviously by comparison, this was relative, innit? He's not that old, but the way he's able to articulate and communicate the feelings and the thoughts that he felt as a young Marine, but also with the experiences he had and how he can calmly, after what he's been through, articulate it so well and in a way that everybody can take on board and empathise with and understand. I'm so proud in a way of what he's done and what he's been able to stand up and do. And again, it's not. I don't think he'll ever look for sympathy. They just want support. So if I can, when I move forward and do things, if I can support or pass on to somebody who can support these things, everything they're doing is they're being creative. They're telling stories. They're doing everything that I love in my new career now. But these are doing it with real people, and it's got tangible, real effect on those individuals, and I'd say the culture within the armed forces. So the importance of trying to support things like these and their projects and his filmmaking projects are massive. I think it's undersold how important some of these creative projects are, and how many people can benefit from it with the message and the storytelling that is involved.
Yeah, I quite agree. And also the benefit for him, the learning how to share these stories. And he's completely self-taught as well, he said in the podcast. And self-taught or not, he's a master storyteller, and that comes across. But I think it is also the process of telling those stories and making those films, scripting them, the shots, etc., is cathartic for him as well. It benefits him as well. And I think that's also an important part of what he's doing.
It is. I can see his positive, the light in his eyes and the way he's moving forward and the spark in his step and that. And it's great to see. And I just can't get over how proud I am from being able to step and come into your space and tell this story, that story, in the way that he did. I think it's too important for people out there not to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what? I think once the banter stops, he will appreciate the pride that you're feeling for his work. I really think he will.
Yeah, but I'm in a probably selfish way, probably because I'm after a job at some stage. You know what I mean? Do
we want to put anything in the description about you're available?
Yeah, James. I'm in between jobs, but it isn't for that. There, like I say, it's for our people. Thanks. Keep on doing what you're doing, James.
Yes. Well done, James.
Before you go, if you're a member of the Armed Forces community and need support with your mental health, Op Courage can help. Use the link in this podcast description for details. Or you can phone the Combat Stress Helpline on 0800 138 1619. If you'd like to contact us, email studio@companyofmakers.com.
Finally, we're giving a really big shout out to our funders. They support all the activities that we provide for the well-being of those who've served. The Royal Navy and Royal Marines Charity, Greenwich Hospital, Arts Council England, and the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Thank you.
This podcast was produced by Rachel Owen, hosted by Tip Cullen and me, recorded and edited by yours truly.
Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.